everyone, welcome back to the NGA podcast, where we dive into all things gymnastics. Whether you're guiding a team, cheering from the sidelines as a parent, or training to reach that peak performance, we're here to share expert tips and inspiring stories that will empower you to excel. I'm your host, Rebecca Grady, and I'm joined here with my incredible co-hosts.
Hey guys, Mike Nudor here. I'm the men's program administrator for NGA. I have a club in Arizona, actually, a couple locations, and I've been doing this for a long time. And glad you guys are on, and glad I'm here to maybe share some of my knowledge and experience that I've come to go through in all my years. So look forward to it.
Nice. I'm Dr. Ian Kreider, head of the Wellness Committee for NGA.
Hey, Rob Axelrod here, Pennsylvania rep.
Thomas Britton, NGA Director Marketing, Indiana State Rep, and Men's Gymnastics Coach.
Awesome. Okay, in today's episode, we're going to do the first part of a three-part segment that we think should be focusing on flexibility, strength and conditioning, and then more skill specifics. So one of the most important aspects of developing great gymnastics at any level is building that strong foundation of basics. But sometimes, especially in competitive programs, there's a rush to get those big skills as fast as possible. So today, we're going to break down why basics matter, the basics of flexibility, and how to properly structure this into training, and ways coaches, gymnasts, and even parents can support this process. So let's get into this. All right, everyone always hears that basics are everything, but let's talk about why that is. Basics create consistency, efficiency, safety. When a gymnast has solid technique in their foundational skills, higher level skills become easier and safer to learn. If we have poor basics, on the other hand, that can lead to bad habits, frustration, and sometimes injury. So what are your guys' thoughts on basics and why are they so important?
All right, perfect. So with basics, I think it's something that I've looked at from both sides of the aisle, from men's gymnastics and women's gymnastics. I think on the men's gymnastics side of things, it can be something that is underplayed, and sometimes we like to skip ahead on things on the men's gymnastics side of things and just throw the big skills on. That's kind of what men's gymnastics is known for, right? It's just throwing the big skills and getting that next big thing. And then on the women's side of things, sometimes I think it's overplayed, where it's like drill, 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 and then maybe we finally get to do the skill, right? And so I think the balance is probably somewhere in the middle, where we develop these good basics and strong foundation, and we progress at a good rate of speed.
Okay, thanks, Ian. In men's gymnastics and in women's gymnastics, but especially men's, when they start to mature, their muscles or their strength start happening really fast, and unfortunately, the flexibility doesn't keep up with that all of the time, and it can run into all types of, for men's gymnastics, shoulder issues if those shoulders are not kept flexible. If there's like a ratio of flexibility to strength, it seems like we're always doing more strength than flexibility, especially in the shoulder area for the men's program. One of the things that I look at is just a proper handstand alignment. If there's an angle in the shoulders, they're tight, and that's a flexibility that needs to be worked on. Most guys stop doing any type of bridge work, any back walkover work, any kick over work like that. Anything in their shoulders, flexibility wise, they stop doing when they get a little bit older, because they're just too tight to do it. So I look at the handstand position. In men's gymnastics, the handstand is so important because it's on every event. Every event you have to have a good handstand, including pommel horse for dismounts. So all of that shoulder flexibility becomes very important for proper technique in the athlete, and also injury prevention. So as far as the men's athletes in our sport, it is really important for them to spend time on shoulder flexibility, and that's the full range, and spend a lot more time on some of the you have your pushing and pulling muscles. Spend a little more time on the pulling muscles than the pushing muscles, so they don't get their shoulders don't become even more tight. So that would be my 2 cents on men's gymnastics and shoulder flexibility. And there's a million stretches that they can work on and do. And I just say that make sure that as they're developing, as they're growing, that you're spending time on their shoulder flexibility.
Yeah. Also, being in the men's program, I'll follow up on that a little bit. It's almost like we have to learn our basics twice. We spend all the time as a younger, men's athlete, stretching every day when you get there. Your conditioning, your skill basics, your skill specific drills on each event, right? And then once they hit that age where, they hit puberty and start gaining all that muscle, it's like, all right, back to square one with the flexibility and the drill basics. We got to learn how to do all this again. So it can be a difficult thing timing wise. And I think a lot of coaches kind of sometimes let that go by the wayside, right? Like, oh, we've already developed this for so long. We don't need the flexibility as much now where we were throwing these such big skills, right? Like, when you talk about releases on high bar, for example, Tkachev, that's a big chest flexibility thing, right? And it can regress a little bit because we just haven't been focusing as much on the stretching. So I think when doing basics in your gym from whatever age, no matter what it is, especially for men, the upper body flexibility is something that you need to do regardless of what skill level you are, and it has to be consistent and every day.
Yeah, to help out with that, I would say posture is a huge issue. So when I look at it from the PT side of things, posture is one of those things where it's not going to cause an injury and it's not going to heal an injury, but it allows an injury to happen, or it allows an injury to heal if it's good posture. And as everybody starts adjusting in their chairs, I love it. So when we talk about posture, with these young men and women that we have going through gymnastics, our bodies are really smart, and they're going to adapt to anything that you give them over time, right? And so, for instance, good adaptation would be, when these gymnasts do just a round off back handspring on floor, they put like 4 to 7 times their body weight through the floor. And so we've got little level 3s and 4s putting 4 to 7 times their body weight through the floor. That's a ton of force, but if you progress it like you should, then your body gets used to it and you don't cause an injury, right? So that's a good example of an adaptation. The poor example of an adaptation would be having bad posture all day long, right? So if these young ladies and young men are always sitting in this rounded position here, right? Then what their body is thinking, because brain body is dumb without any smart input into it, right? And so what their body is thinking is, oh, since you're in this big rounded position all day long and you look like the letter C, that must be the perfect position for you. And I need to optimize that position, right? That's what the body's thinking. If you're going to give me 8 hours a day of this, then I need to make sure I optimize that position. So I'm going to make the muscles on the back a little longer. I'm going to make the muscles in the front a little shorter. I'm going to weaken the muscles in the back just a little bit. I'm going to strengthen the muscles in the front just a little bit. So that way, this is your optimized perfect position, right? As we start talking about that, you go, well, no, that's not what we want at all. Even when I say that to kids, they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, no, I'm not trying to do that. I'm like, well, that's the stimulus you're giving your body. You're telling your body that that's what you need to happen. And so if you're not, you can do all the stretching in the world for this chest and upper back and shoulders. But if they lock it in here during school for 8 or 9 hours a day, plus riding in the car and sitting in their bed, texting their friends at night, and they're always in this position, it doesn't really matter what we do in the gym. They're going to be tight. And because 20 minutes of stretching a day or an hour of stretching a day doesn't make up for the 8 to 10 hours that they're in that position.
Yeah, I like to add a couple things on there, especially with the little ones. We always take the time to put them in their positions or help them get to their positions, and we kind of guide their stretches, and we don't let them do it alone or on their own, so to speak. But then as they get older, like in my day group, I'll go out and I'll guide the run just so that it's like an energetic and upbeat warm up. But then, okay, they have 10 minutes to stretch. I put a number on the clock. I look up and say, okay, at 37, we're going to be on our conditioning. And then, you look out there and like they're just whooping through their stretching, or they're just picking their toes, and they're not really putting the effort that they did when they were little, nor are they being overlooked while they're doing it. So I feel like some of our injuries that may be coming along in the elder years or as they get a little bit older are because we allow them to do their flexibility on their own. I think going back to some basic in your flexibility, guiding your at least once a week or twice a week, even if not every day, spend 5 minutes with them. and get them going on some active flexibility as well as their static flexibility may help along the way. And we started doing that back in September. I noticed from last year that they weren't doing as good a job in their warm-up stretching, or it's more like chit chat time, social time. So I think that's something as we can share with other coaches that we've seen in, or at least I've seen in my program, is that we take so much time. I mean, my little ones, even now on Wednesdays, I have all the compulsory kids, and I take them for bars for half an hour, and I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes is spent on shaping and pull up, pull overs, and L hangs and all different grips and regular hangs. Even some just static holding with push-up shape on a bar, arched on a bar, all kinds of stuff. And then, okay, we have 10 minutes left. Okay, we'll do some, routines, or we'll do some kips or something. So, we spend all that time, and then by the time they get to your level 8, you're like, okay, set a kip cast handstands and let's go. So maybe back to some basics with some of their flexibility, including some of their strength as well.
So what basics do you guys think are important to have in every program? Like, do you think it changes like based on their age and skill level, or are there certain things that you're like, this is what we need across the board?
I'll go back to that one. I'll start that one off since I kind of just finished up with it a little bit. So I do a 5-star, right? They have press handstands, cast handstands. Most of the time I'll do cast handstands in both grips, and spotted. Some days not spotted, depending on how bad my shoulder hurts. Rope climbs, L leg lifts, leaving something out. This is cast, rope climbs. What did I say? Leg lifts. Anyway, so to go with the 4, actually, I'm having a little bit of a brain mess up there, but we start that with the little ones, kind of like a tops based, conditioning is kind of, I think, where we all kind of got it from. And I go with it every single day. And the little ones on the rope climbs, we want them to climb in an L. And so we set parameters, like for my day group. I use them often as an example because they're the ones that want to do the most and that train the hardest, without having to push them. But so they have an L rope climb. They go up on one side, and then they have to bring their feet around the other side and go down, so that you're not always going up on the same side. I don't let them go, right, left, right, left, pull, right, left, pull. They have to go right, pull, left, pull, right, pull, left, pull, so that they're getting some evenness. Same on the way down. And then their leg lifts, their L leg lifts and their straight leg lifts. So they have a set of 30 L's. Or if they can't do 30 in a row, it becomes 2 sets of 30, and they get to have to do 60 of them. So all of the little ones are, kids in that group are at 30, and then it's 15 straights. And they work hard on those positions. And then that's not to say that's the only conditioning, but those are the 4 majors that we start off with every day. And I think that the younger that you start them with it, the longer it will stay. We have kids in here that come back, they're 10 years after being here and they can still do a leg lift. We have 10 years later and they just jump on a bar and do a glide kip because those muscles are so strong from such a young age. If you wait in the little ones, we spend so much time spotting kip, instead of spotting the positions for the kip, or instead of conditioning the positions for the kip. Same with their handstands. Like, Mike was saying, handstands so important. If you're not doing static handstands against the wall, that's a big no-no. And how they're doing their static positions. And that will lead to, later on, it's probably more of another part of our conversation, but with little ones, they may not have a kip, but they're doing cast handstands every day. And people would say, well, that's so silly. Why do you do that? Well, why do I do that? Because they do handstands at every other event. Why do we wait on bars to just until they get their kip, till they start doing cast handstands? Spot cast handstands. They do handstands on a beam. They do flying handstands on vault. They do handstands on floors and backwards handstands and back handspring. So why not do handstands on bars? And then later on, I teach them how to fall off of bars. And then somehow in the way we start like a Ginger drill, just flip them through a Ginger and put them on a bar. They're 5. We're like, wow, why do you do that? Well, guess who's going to do a Ginger when they're 16? Because it was the first skill that they learned. Or, it doesn't have to be a Ginger, but that's just an example. So some of those bigger skills can be happening when they're little and they don't even have a cast handstand or a kip for that matter. And I think that's all based on strength and play, but in a proper way where their muscles are going to be used to it and they're going to be able to get to it a little later on in their gymnastics career without any injuries or fears.
Yeah, that's great. So I think to now bring that conversation down to just flexibility, I think there's anytime we start talking about flexibility, there are 2 things that come up. Should I do static stretching or should I do dynamic stretching? Right. And for those of you that don't know the difference, static stretching is really anything that's 1 minute hold or longer, whereas dynamic stretching is really anything that is that is like 6 seconds or shorter as far as the hold duration. And in between 6 seconds and 1 minute is really kind of nothing. There's no benefit to static stretching really under a minute if you kind of look at things, and and you don't get enough repetitions in of the dynamic stretching if you get over 6 seconds, right? Unless you're going to do, I guess a 30-second hold 10 times, but most of us aren't going to do that, right? So when do I use each one of those things? Dynamic stretching is certainly superior as far as gaining flexibility, right? In order to gain flexibility, dynamic stretching does a much better job. It also does a better job for warm-ups, right? And the purpose of warm-ups is to warm your body up. And then if you sit in a split, by the time you sit through all 3 splits for a minute, you've set for 3 minutes, and your heart rate has come down and you're not warm anymore, right? Well, then all of a sudden, maybe that warm-up wasn't as effective as possible. So it's good for warm-ups. It's good for gaining flexibility. So then do I use static stretching? Well, I do, but only use it for 2 things. So one would be I'll do it for a cool down stretch if the gymnast already has all the flexibility that they need, right? Because static stretching is going to work, but it takes a long time to work as far as gaining flexibility goes, which is why you don't get good at yoga within 3 months or 3 weeks or something. It takes like a year to get good at yoga, because yoga is a lot of static stretching. Right. So static stretching works, but it takes a long time to work. And when we're talking about growing gymnasts who are actively getting tighter as you're trying to loosen them up through those growth periods, then static stretching is going to be one of those things where you're kind of beating your head up against the wall. But I'll use it at the end of practice for a cool down if they're already flexible. My loosey-gooseys that have all 3 splits down, I'm like, yeah, you just need recovery at the end of practice. So static stretching can help with that. Whereas my gymnasts that are super tight, it's like, all right, well, let's get the split down using some dynamic stretching, and you'll get some recovery with that as well. Now, the second time I use static stretching would be for my itty bitties, right? If they don't know how to hold a proper split position, then they're probably not going to be able to do split sliders or go in and out of a split properly.
I can go real quick. So I as a coach who's still, learning like what works, what doesn't work flexibility wise, even though I trained for such a long time, as a coach, it's different. Okay, how do I do better for my athletes? Like, how do I continue to improve and, make the things work that are going to be the most consistent for my team? So, Ian, I kind of want to ask you a question following up on exactly what you just said. Dynamic versus static stretching. What are some good examples, men and women, if you can, of, more dynamic stretching that is easy to set up or make happen in a practice that coaches can use for their team?
For sure. And static or dynamic stretching can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be, right? So you can do the simplest form of it would be, well, normally I do an overhead stretch and I pull my tricep and I pull my elbow across behind my head, right? And we would hold it for 10 seconds or something. Well, instead of holding it for 10 seconds, just feel the stretch on and then feel the stretch off and then stretch on and then stretch off, right? So any stretch that you're already doing statically can be turned into a dynamic stretch just by coming out of the stretch and going back in, right? And you'll get a lot more compliance from your gymnast because no one likes static stretching, right? Static stretching, if you're doing it correctly, it hurts really bad and you have to just embrace that hurt for like a minute. And there's even some research out there that shows like 3 minutes of static stretching works, right? And who's going to hold a perfectly still split that hurts really bad for 3 minutes? Almost no one, right? So you'll get more compliance out of it. So on the simplest side of things, any stretch that you're doing right now can be turned into a dynamic stretch. Just get out of the stretch and put it and get back into it. On the most complicated side of things, you can do like PNF stretching, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation stretching, right? Which you feel like you need a degree in just to pronounce. That has to do with like some contract relax stuff, and where you would like, maybe you're in a split and you try and pull out of the split, right? And you pull for like 6 seconds, and then you relax for 6 seconds and you go down a little further. Then you pull for 6 seconds and then relax and go down a little further. That stuff works just fine. But again, compliance is usually not as high. I don't do it with younger kids. I would do it with older kids if I'm going to do it with somebody. But I usually just go for simplicity because I'm all about making my job easier, not harder.
Hey, if I can jump in, I just wanted to circle back because we're talking about flexibility, and we were talking about basics on all the events. So for flexibility, I think everyone would agree, just like strength and conditioning, it has to be monitored by the coach. It's something that is very important. So you've got to be there. You can't just send the kids over and say, okay, work on this flexibility, because it'll get done halfway or not at all. It's something you have to monitor with your athletes and keep an eye on and make sure they're doing it correctly. That if you're working on your splits, that your back knee is down, your front knee is up. All those positions are really important in stretching, and you want to make sure that they're stretching the correct muscles and tendons and when they're doing their flexibility. And I wanted to circle back on the basics. In men's gymnastics, in girls, we've got bars, which is a lot of basic swings. Just on parallel bars alone, there's support swing, there's upper arm swing, there's long hang swing. These are all basics that the boys have to develop and work on, along with high bar swing, ring swing, pommel horse swing. So whenever you go to an event, you should always spend time on these basic swings that they're doing. That's going to create a foundation for them, so that they're going to be able to learn skills at a faster rate with the strength, the flexibility, and the basic swing on those events. They're going to be able to advance much, much quicker. So it's kind of a package. You have to do all three, and you as a coach really have to monitor all three and make sure everything's being done correctly.
Yeah, that's a great point. And with flexibility too, it's important to realize that, first, it's to prevent injury. You want strong athletes and you want flexible athletes, but strength is less so if they don't actually, like you can be the strongest person in the world, but if you can't even reach around and scratch your back and you try and throw a baseball, you're probably going to throw your shoulder out, right? So strength is great, but only if you have the flexibility required to do that, right? And these basics are great, but only, and I guess the foundation of foundations probably is flexibility. And like with these swings, right, I have to teach my girls on bars that a tap swing doesn't come from the lower back, it comes from the entire spine. And so if you use the chest and the upper back to create the tap and not just the lower back, not only is it a more effective tap, but you also prevent some of those lower back injuries as well, because they're compensating with that lower back stuff so much. And I remember doing bails on rings and as a gymnast, and every once in a while you catch it wrong and go, oh man, that just killed my lower back, right? Well, it's because now I know, right? Dumb brain back then, smart brain now. Now I know it's like, well, if I'd have just opened up my chest, then I would have been just fine, and it wouldn't have hurt at all, right? Or if I hadn't just gone, oh no, I'm so scared. If I had just basically done what my coach told me to, I would have been just fine, right? So flexibility is one of those things where you have to have that as the kind of foundation of foundations, because I see on the men's side of things, I see the mistake of, hey, your wrists hurt on pommel horse, so come over here and do your band exercises or do your wrist extensions and wrist curls and that sort of thing. But strength won't prevent that wrist pain usually, because muscles don't push, they pull. So if you're going to support the wrist by adding strength, well, it just doesn't work that way, right? If the wrist won't bend backward, then it's going to hurt every time you tell it to bend backward. Every time you get on the leather on pommel horse and you're cranking that wrist around, well, then you're going to have more pain, right? And so I see the same thing on the women's side with ankles, right? You'll have a sore ankle on a low landing or something. You go, all right, well, go do your ABCs and go do your TheraBand work for your ankles and get those stronger. It's like, well, that's all fine and dandy, but if they don't have enough range of motion to land short, that's going to hurt every time. It doesn't matter how strong those muscles are.
So what if coaches are wanting to try to figure out how to structure this? When should they be doing it? And then how should they structure flexibility in?
Yeah, I would say it just depends on how much of an emphasis it needs to be placed, right? Because we'll talk about this too with strength and conditioning the next time we do this this podcast. But with strength and conditioning, if it needs to be a priority, you do it at the beginning of practice. If it doesn't need to be a priority, you can put it at the end of practice, right? So same thing with flexibility. If you need flexible gymnasts, right? If all your gymnasts have splits that are this high off the ground, or they can't open their shoulders and do a handstand hold because their upper back is so tight, well, then that needs to take priority, right? And so what I like doing is we do a warm up at the beginning of practice, and then as part of like a bars complex or part of a warm up for floor or something like that, they also have some flexibility that's individualized for them. Obviously, I get a benefit of being able to program that stuff a little easier being a PT, but they have their individual assignments, or I call it pre-strength, right? Where they do some of the leg lifts and stuff that Rob was talking about. But I've got some girls that are working on their wrist flexibility. I've got some girls that are working on upper backs or hip flexors or whatever that those problem areas are. They're hitting that before every single event, because right now is the time to do it. We just finished up. Most of them just finished up their season. And so now's the time to really work on that foundation of, all right, we've got to open up the hips. We've got to get the wrist more flexible. We've got to make sure the upper back is moving like it's supposed to. So because it's a priority, we start off everything with that.
That's great. You know your athletes and kind of what they need. Along with that, that dynamic warm up that we do at the beginning, and then we jump into pre-strength, and then we go to the events. And what I want to talk about is the events. We do stations with the boys because it keeps them out of trouble. But all of the stations, there's always a station of flexibility. There's always a station of some type of strength with them on each event that we go to. And so we're kind of double dipping. We're not just doing it at the beginning or doing it at the end. We're also doing it on every event that we go to. The strength that we do is more specific strength. If we're on rings, it's specific to rings. If it's floor, it's usually press work, things like that. And the flexibility, rings is obviously shoulders, and we work on floor. We can work on hip flexibility and things like that. So we spend time on each event working their basics, obviously their skills, but also always have a station of flexibility and strength with them.
Yeah, that's where I was going, was that we do our conditioning first because it is of high importance to us. And then on Fridays, we try to change it up a little bit. But I too, just like Mike, we always have something going on at the event, especially with the little ones. When they get to, if they go to bars first, usually one group or the other, they have a regimen of bar conditioning. It's like it's a conditioning just for bars that we do, and that was right after we just did conditioning for a half an hour, but it's bar specific. And we used to have like those little side stations of flexibilities, like with the sliders, while they're on floor. I think it's a good reminder for me, for my junior coaches, to bring that back. They're doing everybody working out together, and then, okay, let's sit down 16 kids and one kid watch one kid do a routine. Like, I'm so over that, right? So we changed that up earlier in the season, but now they can do some slider splits on the side. That will be helpful to them. Or even some band splits or some band kicks on the side would be also helpful. But yes, that on every event, and especially on beam, like I don't really do too much complex, but once a week on beam during season, because I feel you don't need complex during season, you need routine during season. But off season, as soon as it's over, it's right back to complex. We have short complex and we have long complex, and there's 2 short complexes and there's 2 long complexes, and all of them involve some sort of beam specific. Some days it's bands and they got like therabands and or bungees, and they're doing jumps with the bungees or releves with bungees. So again, in full agreement with everybody so far that we're talking about having those sports or event specific conditioning and flexibility while they're doing, just a double dipping, the perfect word for it. Just because we did it in the beginning, or we're going to do it at the end, or not, we can do it during each event also.
Yeah, I wish, coming from a PT, right? I wish I had 30 or 45 minutes every day to just work on prehab and injury prevention stuff, but that's not the case, right? I'm not going to hold the gymnast there for that long every day. There's other ways that I can make it more efficient. And so doing it during events as a side station is a great way to make sure that you're being efficient with your time and you're not wasting a bunch of time.
So, what are some common mistakes that you guys normally see when it comes to flexibility in gyms, or things that you've seen coaches do, maybe gymnasts doing, parents like allowing? What are some of those mistakes that we've noticed?
I've never seen any mistakes with flexibility. I think it's all perfect. No. Yeah,
It's
Rob,
like,
you go
wow.
ahead. Then I'll jump in.
So obviously back in the day, right, everybody did oversplits, and we still do them. They have their place. But also back in the day, the coaches used to push them down during oversplits. Now things have changed, right? Don't touch anybody. No, you're inflicting bodily harm or whatever terminology that they're using for pushing down a split. So now we let them push their own splits down, just like Dr. Ian said, PNF, I happen to have an exercise science degree, not anywhere near his, but enough knowledge to know that we can use that common and often with them. And we talk about it. But I think the biggest mistakes are we teach that to the parents, or we give them a 10-second or 20-second crash course on they need to get their shoulders more flexible, or they need to get their splits need to be down. Their splits aren't down. And so the parents go home and they just sit on their kids, because it's their kids and they can do that. But, we can't do that, and nor should the parents do that. Should we be allowed to do it? Yes, I think we should be allowed to do it since we're trained to do it. But it becomes what's it, torture? You're torturing the children. Is that the word they use? If you're pushing them down in a split. But if you're doing it as a PNF type of stretch, then it can be done, properly, or less torturous, so to speak. But I think that's the biggest mistake, is the parents are overstretching their children, and they don't know where. If I'm going to stretch a gymnast shoulder or a tricep and add some pressure at the elbow, their arm is behind their head, then I grab the top of their elbow and push down. That's something that I can do it safely. I can't ask a parent to do that, and they think that, oh yeah, we gym class are really just hard, and they're beating their kids up. That's the biggest mistake I see. And wait, one more thing is letting another gymnast stretch another gymnast's shoulders. That's another one.
For sure. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I wanted to just jump in. I think the rule of thumb in the society today, and it works well, is when stretching, all you need is the athlete's own body weight. You don't need to add any weight. You don't need to add any pressure to it, or add any weight while doing their flexibility. I think their own body weight is enough to get the stretch done, prevent injury, and it's just a rule that we kind of have in our gym, because you'll have that a little bit overzealous coach that wants to help with the stretching and the flexibility. So you just show them ways that they can do the same thing. Instead of stretching the shoulders physically, you can have them hang on a bar with a roller behind their shoulders. So you're using just their body weight for the stretch, and you're not physically stretching them or adding weight to their flexibility.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's good. It would be nice if everyone was trained well enough to stretch their gymnasts appropriately. Then maybe we could do that, right? But very few coaches are actually trained well enough. They might think that they are, but not very few coaches are actually trained well enough to stretch gymnasts appropriately. They don't know which muscles can take what amount of force, and if they're even stretching a small muscle or a big muscle. Most coaches don't know those things. Yeah, good rule of thumb is let the gymnasts stretch themselves, and I think it's a great way that you can start to create a little ownership and a little self-responsibility with our gymnasts, is kind of infusing that, hey, if you want to get better, stretching is the way to go. And if you're not willing to put forth the effort on stretching, then other things are going to fall by the wayside as well. And we've talked about on previous podcasts about how we like to have that self-reliance in gymnastics, especially the older they are. And so learning how to stretch appropriately is a great way to start producing some of that in your gymnasts.
All right, so that's a wrap for today's episode of the NGA podcast. So as you can see from today's discussion, that there's a lot that goes into flexibility. It's about knowing your gymnasts and their individual needs. It's about training smart and making flexibility intentional. Now we want to hear from you. What's your biggest challenge when it comes to flexibility? What have you done that's been really successful for you and your gym? We'd love to hear about it all. Let us know in the comments or on social media how we can expand on today's episode and help you create the right training programs for your gym. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with fellow coaches, parents, and gymnasts, or leave a review. So thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay happy, healthy, and high performing.